A warm welcome and a very good evening to all the participants of the Spotlight Dialogue Series, Episode 2, brought to you by the Integrated Sustainability and Urban Creativity Center, powered by the Asia Pacific University. We are once again back in action. This time, the topic of discussion is Malaysia's tourism landscape, the road to recovery post COVID 19. Our speaker for this evening is Dr. Siow May Ling, a senior lecturer at the Department of Landscape Architecture, Faculty of Design and Architecture, University Putra, Malaysia. Dr. May Ling holds a PhD in nature tourism. She teaches both postgraduate and undergraduate courses in social science as well as business-related subjects. Dr. May Ling's academic interests are in addressing sustainability, policy analysis, and resource governance, with a particular focus on tourism and its peripherals. The key focus area of our work includes knowledge transfer, initiatives by transferring ideas, research results, and skills between organizations, businesses, public sectors, and the wider community. Besides, Dr. May Ling is a certified action learning coach from the World Institute of Action Learning and a certified project management professional. Dr. May Ling, would you like to say something to our audience?
Thank you, Dr. Ravi. Very good afternoon to you and to all who are tuned in today. Also, thank you for the opening remark. I am truly humbled to be here, Dr. Ravi.
Okay, Dr. May Ling, without further ado, we will begin today's session, and the format will be a question and answer format. So, the question that we have lined up for you today, number one, could you please give us a brief introduction to the tourism industry landscape prior to the pandemic?
Okay, right, Dr. Ravi, you see, the tourism landscape in Malaysia started a long time ago, probably in the late 80s, and we have seen a steady growth year on year, and tourism has played an essential role in supporting the country's economy. In fact, the fifth Malaysian plan that the country mooted back in the late 80s was to ensure that there is a standalone ministry called the Ministry of Culture, Arts and Tourism. So we fast forward that 30 years on, in 2019, the year before the pandemic happened, the tourism industry in Malaysia actually contributed 15.9% to the Malaysian economy. And in absolute values, that would be 240.2 billion ringgit in gross value from the industry alone. So if you put into another context, tourism is actually the third most significant contributor to Malaysia's GDP, and that is after manufacturing as well as commodities. So what happened in 2019 is that the industry recorded 3.6 million persons in terms of employment, which out of that, 23.6 of the total employment came from F&B, 34.7%, retail 32.5%, and services 16.8%. So because of this big number, the country was actually preparing for its biggest year yet, and that would be year 2020, Visit Malaysia. And what we targeted, what the ministry actually targeted, was to actually receive 30 billion people in terms of tourist arrivals, and they projected 100 billion in tourist receipts, and that was actually projected by MOTAC in 2019. So, because of this projection in 2019, that is why the Malaysian government actually was very confident that year 2020 Visit Malaysia was going to be the year for tourism.
Okay,
So that
Dr.
was
May Ling, that
the
was a
landscape. Yeah.
correct. That was a very ambitious, what do you call, prediction by the government. They had very
Yes.
high
Yes.
expectations. Unfortunately, things didn't turn out as expected. So here we have COVID-19 pandemic, which has put all the plans to, it is thrown it to the back seat. All right, it's taken a back seat
Yes.
now. So we
Yeah.
move on to the second question. The second question that we have is, what did the pandemic do to the tourism industry? In other words, what impact has it had on the tourism industry?
Okay. You see, why? Just to answer your earlier question, why was there a very ambitious projection? Because in
Mm.
2019, the foreign receipts
Mhm.
was 84.14 billion. So 100 billion versus 84.14 billion, that's actually what they projected in 2020. Answering your question, actually, what happened during the pandemic in the context of the tourism industry? So the billion-dollar industry came to a complete standstill because on March 18, 2020, the Prime Minister announced that the country was on a MCO, the Movement Control Order. And on the very next day, the Ministry of Tourism, Arts and Culture, MOTAC, called off the entire Visit Malaysia campaign, freeze over-the-counter and online services for application, license renewal, and all hospitality and tourism-related businesses. So can you imagine we were up there and then suddenly everything came to a standstill. So the ability to actually travel freely was quickly frazzled, and amid countries tightening border controls, and is curtailed hospitality and tourism in a way that has never been seen in this country, except in the times of world wars in the 20th century. So not only have we stopped all tourism-related activities, but the pandemic has altered the tourism landscape, and it has caused a loss of 100 billion ringgit in 2020 alone. So, so what has happened? 2020 is deemed tourism's darkest year by Companies Commission of Malaysia, and it's reported actually that 204 tourism-related companies have shut down. 109 hotels and short-term lodging has also ceased operations. 95 travel companies also, and 10.9 billion ringgit in terms of losses in the airline industry. And what has been projected as the biggest year yet, what did we get? Instead, we had 12.2 billion in tourist receipts and only 4.33 billion in million in tourist arrivals, and a contraction of 80.9% year on year.
So,
It's a
Dr. May
tremendous
Ling,
projection. Yeah,
just to reiterate what you mentioned, we have lost 100 billion worth of revenues in
100
2020. Yes, 100 billion, 100 billion worth,
billion.
uh,
Yes,
yeah, billion, 100 billion worth of revenues in 2020. And then we have had 204 tourism related companies shutting down, 109 hotels also being either closed down or sold, and 95 travel companies had to cease operation, and 100 and sorry 10.9 billion losses in the airline industry. So that's a hefty amount. That's really a hefty amount. There was such a big blow to our country in terms of our GDP, in terms of the revenue. Okay, having said that, I would like to move over to the next question. How are the tourism industry stakeholders responding to the current situation? I repeat, how are the tourism industry stakeholders responding to the current situation? Over to you, Dr.
okay.
Mailing.
Yeah, Dr. Ravi, thank you. So if we look at the hospitality industry, right, it loses 300 million ringgit for every 2 weeks that its doors are shut. So as long as we do not lift the restrictions, the hospitality industry will go even further down the trench. And looking into the more recent data, since June 2021, another 120 hotels have ceased operation, either temporary or permanently. And we're looking at 11.3 billion ringgit losses to date since the pandemic happened. So what I'm saying is that all of this data that we have is the formal economy, but we also need to look at the informal economy. So that's of course another talk show, I would say. But then take for example, right, um, the Makcik Kia that sells curry puffs outside the Langkawi jetty. If there are no tourists going to the jetty, she is unable to sell her curry puffs, and she is unable to contribute um, to the informal economy. And just to give you
Right.
an insight, there is 1.36 million people contributing to this informal economy. Yeah. So all this data that we have, that I've been telling you and reiterating the impacts, that is the formal economy. We still haven't quantified the informal one yet. So it is way bigger than what it seems to be, and the impact is way deeper than what we can imagine. Yeah, Dr. Ravi. So
Yep.
stakeholders are actually pleading for the reopening of the tourism industry, and they want a tourism recovery roadmap. Yeah, to plan and to strategize the future of the industry. You see, um, something which has occurred maybe early this year is that my research team and I actually sat down and we wanted to see how our contributions or our know-hows are able to help the Malaysian tourism industry. So what we did was we wrote a proposal to the Ministry of Higher Education to apply for the FRGS grant. And what the FRGS grant is, if you're not familiar, to our listeners, is the Fundamental Research Grant by the Ministry of Higher Education Malaysia, and and they have allocated us a good amount of, or rather, we were granted this grant very recently, and they have requested, or they have approved our grant so that we are able to construct a framework to push for recovery and beyond. Yeah. So Dr. Ravi, the fact that the grant was granted clearly shows that the government recognizes the need for a recovery plan. Yeah. So that's really important. That's an important fact that we need to ponder upon.
Okay, Dr. Mailing, just to go back a little bit, it seems that very often we focus on the direct relationship with the those industries that are directly related to the tourism industry. All right, the revenue that is directed directly from the tourism industry, and most often than not, we tend to overlook the those industries that are indirectly related to the tourism supply chain. Okay, like you
That's
said,
right. Mm.
you just said mentioned Machikia just now selling curry puff at the jetty. So
Mm.
similarly, we will have so many other people like that in the same boat. Taxi drivers, for example, those people are running a hair salon, people running a convenience store. So all of these people are affected some way or another indirectly because of
Indeed.
the tourism industry. Okay, so
Indeed.
yes, and that is why we have seen in the past a lot of um, untoward incidences, to the point where people have like they don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, and some of them have
Mm.
actually resorted to taking their own lives, committing suicide, because they just couldn't
That's
put food
that's
on the
right.
table. Forget about paying up loans, okay? Forget about meeting commitments. Even putting food on the table for the children was impossible. So it was really, really hard times. People were hard hit, and like you said, they were pleading to the government to allow them to operate the business. Uh, some of the bigger corporations were getting off easily because of their network, because of
Mm.
their connection. They were getting permissions to operate. But the smaller players, the SMEs, had to just shut down and just wait, and because of that, they have lost so much in terms of revenue and employment, the loss of employment. I think
Yeah.
some of them are just not quantified. Some of them are just not quantified accurately.
That's
Okay.
right. That's right.
All right. Let's
Dr.
move
Ravi, you
on.
see,
Yes.
yeah.
Hmm.
You
Please carry
mentioned
on.
it so well. You have said it so well.
Hmm.
Also, because tourism is interdisciplinary, it moves from one area to another area.
Yes.
What the viewers always try to envision in tourism is that there is a hotel and there is a user. But as you mentioned so rightly, is that
Right.
the peripherals are so huge. We go into
Yes.
the F&B. F&B may not just be the hotels, but it may also include the small stalls that we take for granted that is by the street, you see. So,
The guys in
so
the market,
exactly what you say, yeah.
maybe. Yeah. So
The
we
whole
only
supply
see
chain is affected.
tourism. Correct. We only see tourism superficially. All right. We only
That's
see
right.
it
Mm.
superficially. We only see tour and travel operators. Maybe we see airlines and hotels, but we fail to look at the what you call the suppliers at the back. Like the fresh fruit suppliers, the meat suppliers, the poultry suppliers, transport suppliers. Along the way. So there are many other tourism actually make inroads to other industries. Okay, and
That's right.
tourism is actually so, like you said, so wide. There are
So
so many
far and wide,
peripherals.
yeah.
There is the accommodation. Yes, there is the accommodation. There is the F&B. There is the attractions and events. There is the retailing industry, and there is the airlines and so many other industries that support the tourism industry. So the impact is so much more wider. All right, which
So much
most people
wider,
don't realize.
yeah.
They just look at it superficially. Okay, having said that, let's move on to our next question for today. What policy areas should regulators be addressing to recover from the aftermath of the pandemic? So let's look at some policy, what do you call, policy areas for addressing the recovery. Dr.
Okay.
Mailing?
Right. So Malaysia is very, very good at policies. Yeah, we are one of the best in the region. So I just have, out of the many policies that we have, I would like to highlight on three main policies that we envision is able to address the aftermath of the pandemic. The first one is the National Entrepreneurship Policy 2030. So this is fairly new. Yeah. So if we look into some of the points within the National Entrepreneurship Policy, one of the main areas is to support the opening of business opportunities for entrepreneurs to all segments of Malaysian society and to ensure an inclusive economic transformation. So the keyword here is inclusive economic transformation in elevating Malaysia's socio-economic status. Uh, one reason is because are as we mentioned, the informal economy also needs to be revived. So this national entrepreneurship policy is one of the has one area that enables that. Secondly, this national entrepreneurship policy also has an area that looks into intensifying cooperative movements for low-income households, which we address them as the B40. So in yesterday's news, it was mentioned that the B40 community is getting larger. People from the M40 are moving down to the B40 because of unemployment, and this also includes rural communities, yeah, including promoting and establishing of community-based cooperatives. Yeah, so we're looking at from bottom up. Yeah, for the community-based cooperatives to take initiative into building themselves, building their own economy. Then we look into the Malaysian digital economy blueprint. So this is nothing that we are not familiar with, Dr. Ravi. The digital economic blueprint, whereby we want to target policies in achieving the digital inclusive society. And that means not only are we supposed to improve the infrastructure, but at the same time, we want to improve digital literacy, yeah, and skills among society members. The workforce equipped with the specific skills in the digital economy that allows them to grow in tandem with the national digital economy. So we're looking at how we're going to educate and how we're going to train individuals on how to go into the e-commerce platform. So that is one of the digital economy blueprint way moving forward. And the last important policy that I'd like to address is also the national tourism policy. Yeah. And this includes applying inclusive development to include women, youth, and the disadvantaged groups, and select a pool of local champions based at successful CBT, or we call it community-based tourism, for entrepreneurship and business skill training and internship placement abroad. Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, we are very good at policies, and we have one of the best policies in the region. Yeah. So if we are able to take and converge these policies into making something even better and bigger, then of course, yeah, we can path a way forward, to improve the or rather towards the road of recovery post pandemic. Dr. Ravi.
Okay, so just to reiterate what you said, the three main policies that you raised just now: National
Mm,
Entrepreneurship Policy 2030. I think that is one of those elements that is much needed right now. Entrepreneurship. I think as a fast-growing, developing country, I think the government has to find ways to promote entrepreneurship among our youth. This is one thing that is an area that is developed for development, a key area for development. If only the government can do something together with the various private organizations, private bodies, as well as NGOs, to see how they can to expedite entrepreneurship among the Malaysian businessmen and the Malaysian youth. And then you
mm,
mentioned Malaysian digital economy blueprint. Yes, this is also another very vital development that we need to look at. And we need, like you said very clearly, it is the skills training, the manpower that we need. I think currently we have shortage of talent. Okay, currently we have shortage of talent. In a way, I should not be saying this, but I think we have a brain drain. Okay, much of our young talent have already left the country, probably looking for better prospects. All right. Maybe they couldn't find what they wanted to in this country, so they have gone abroad looking for better prospects. So we have a bit of a brain drain there, so we need to find ways to bring them back, or to nurture our current generation, developing their skills, their knowledge, in terms of the digital economy. There is
Mm.
a grave shortage in that area. And then the third point is the national tourism policy. And in the national tourism policy, we have always given significance to women, especially single mothers, especially single mothers, youth, and disadvantaged groups. Personally, I have been to some of the homestay programs in Malaysia, where they are
Mm.
doing great job, wonderful job, where they have actually employed single mothers, okay, or given them piecemeal projects to these single mothers, so that they can participate in the tourism industry, like in terms of food production, in terms of agricultural produce, growing vegetables, and marketing them. So some of our what do we call tourism industry projects that we have had in the past, especially the homestay
Mm.
programs, they have seriously paid attention to women, especially women, single mothers, in order
Mm.
to make sure that they can be independent by
Right.
participation in the various tourism projects.
Right.
Do you have anything else to add on to that, Dr. Mailing?
No, I totally agree with you, Dr. Ravi. And at the same time, we're talking about the quotation industry, that the single women or any marginalized
Mm-hmm.
individuals, they are able to participate in order to alleviate the, to give more income, alternative incomes to the families as well. Yeah.
Okay, right. We will now move on to the next interesting question. Uh, Dr. Mailing, can you please elaborate on transfer of ideas with reference to the tourism players?
Okay. Right. Why the word here is, I know the opening I did mention of transferring of ideas, but moving into this pandemic, the word here is not transferring of ideas anymore, because when we transfer ideas, it seems that we are transferring to the players. It seems one way. Yeah. I think what we need to look for are more collaborative courses moving forward. And reason I say that is because we as academics or researchers, we are never going to be in the shoes of someone who has lost their jobs, their business, or their livelihood, you see. But what we can do is to share of ideas on how a particular business or individuals can use resources sustainably. Yeah, that's one. And how the business can be sustainable in long term. So we're talking about two different sustainability here: use of resources sustainably, and how we can ensure that their business is sustainable in the long term. Dr. Ravi?
Okay, Dr. Mailing. So if I heard it correctly, you talked about two kinds of sustainability. One is the sustainability of the resources. I believe you are referring to natural resources, and also you are referring to human resources, as well as basically we need to look at financial resources whenever we
Mm.
talk about sustainability, economic sustainability. Then we look at environmental sustainability, and then socio-cultural sustainability. All right. So these are the
Yes,
three
yes.
areas of sustainability we need to look at. And
Mm.
then you did mention another word that I found interesting: collaboration, collaborative efforts. I think here you are very, very right. There should be more collaboration, in my opinion, between the academia and the industry. Any kind of problem, any kind of crisis, I think can be resolved if there is a stronger collaboration, more strategic alliances, smart
Between.
partnerships,
Mm.
or any kind of collaborations between the academia and the industries, because academia is very much involved in research and development, and the industries are actually implementing whatever discoveries we
I
make
think it's,
through the
mm.
research. So this kind of collaboration should be enhanced. What have you got to say about that, Dr. Mailing?
um, okay, the resource sustainably, reusing resources sustainably not only encompasses the natural part of resources. It includes all resources to begin with. Yeah. Reason being is because we find that the industry sometimes they overlook in terms of the impact of their business on their ecosystem, and not we're not talking about the natural ecosystem. We're just talking about the ecosystem that they are in. Yeah, whether or not they are interested in upcycling, recycling, using sustainable products. So this one, using resources sustainably, is a whole big area, and I would say the foundation of that will be the sustainability theory, or we can even look at the United Nations Sustainable Development, the SDGs, 17 SDGs that we can put our weight upon and move forward from there.
Okay, Dr. May Ling, I find this particular area of discussion very, very interesting. It has caught my attention because you said sustainable use of resources, making sure that they are used
Yeah,
sustainably, because we want to make sure that we don't deplete the resources completely, so much so we deprive of our future generation of the natural resources
that's
that
right.
we have. That is why our center, Integrated Sustainability and Urban Creativity Center at APU, we have taken one step forward and we are looking at circular economy. All right. So even
Mm-hmm.
when the resources are being deployed and resources have been used, we take one step further and we see how we can do recycling. Okay, recycling
Right, right.
waste material or used materials so
Mm,
that they can be converted into usable products. So
right.
that is one of the focus of our center here,
Pre-
ISUC at APU. We're looking at circular economy. Would you like to add something to
Precise,
that, Dr. Mailing?
precisely, Dr. Ravi. Could you,
Mm,
for example, how many people or how many industries advocate
mm.
for cradle to cradle circular economy? Hardly. Yeah, it's always going to be a cradle to
Yep.
grave.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we need to inculcate this mindset that resources are going to finish. Yeah, resources are uh, going to
Yes.
be exhausted one day. Yeah, so the cradle to cradle concept, you don't have to use the entire product back to its cradle, but what we can do is to take parts of the component to upcycle those items to give it life again. And not only in the tourism industry, but we're talking about the large, the entire business industry. How many do that? You see, just take for example, yeah, we have so much of rain, so much of rain. How many people actually harvest rain in Malaysia? Yeah, I just
Correct.
see rain falling on the floor and it goes into the drain, and yet the gardener would use the hose to
Mm.
to water the plants.
Wash his car.
That's mind blowing. That's mind
Water the
blowing.
plants. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, that's absolutely mind blowing. So again, using resources sustainably, that is the gold mine there.
Yes,
Yeah,
this is a very interesting topic, Dr. Mailing. In fact, we can go on and on for hours
you can go on and
discussing
on. That's right.
this topic. Unfortunately, we have to move
We,
on to our
that's
next
right. Okay.
question. There
All
are a
right.
few more
Sure.
questions
Sure.
lined up. Our next question would be, how do you think we can overcome the current crisis?
Okay, Dr. Ravi. There's no short answer. There's no straightforward answer. But we are moving forward slowly and in using baby steps. We are probably in a very infancy stage right now. But if you look into what the government is doing, is that we are currently reviving the industry by creating travel bubbles. Yeah, the most recent travel bubble that we are seeing recently will be the travel bubble to Langkawi Island. And if I'm not mistaken, the minister Nancy Shukri actually said that we are going to open a few more travel bubbles, yeah, to Genting, Malacca, and Tioman, starting 1st October. So listeners out there, yeah, don't rush yet. Go when there are less crowd. Okay, but what ultimately that we need is a good recovery plan. So one that
Yeah.
overarches and converges the multiple policies of governance lah. So if you remember earlier, I talked about three different policies. There are so many policies in Malaysia alone. Yeah, and we need to converge those policies to enable that, to use the current resources that we have to push the industry forward. And you see, the country has gone through different crises. It's just not in this scale. If you look in the past, we have gone through SARS in 2003, MERS in 2014 and 2017, but none of this crisis has actually created a void as deep as the COVID-19 pandemic. So recovery won't be simple nor quick, but I don't think it is impossible, Dr. Ravi.
Yeah, I'd like to. I actually quite agree with what you said. The first travel bubble that was opened up was Langkawi. I think they did that also a couple of months ago. And when they did that, already there were what you call the entire island was already um, uh, filled up with human beings. I think it was congested. All the hotels were fully booked, and the flights were all fully booked, and Langkawi was crowded, and people were already were expressing concerns. And then quite recently, a couple of weeks ago, they moved MCO from phase 2 to phase 3, and then Port Dickson was opened up, Bagan Lalang and a few other places were opened up, and all these beaches were filled with human beings. They were so crowded, and the entire weekend, and the next moment when they left, the beaches were full of
Rubbish.
waste, full of rubbish. Yes, and so this is what Malaysians need to realize. Okay, yes, they waited for so long for the authorities to give them the flexibility. Now they have the flexibility to travel, and now not only Langkawi, like you said, Tioman is opened up, Genting is opened up, Malacca will be opened up, and the streets are going to be jammed up with traffic, heavy vehicles. I mean, vehicles all over the place, and that's going to cause air pollution, noise pollution, rubbish. So it's not only the pandemic that we are going to be facing with, but it's also the sustainability aspect, the environmental sustainability aspect that is posing a very serious concern. And I think the authorities have to seriously look at this. Yes, we need to revive the economy, because the economy is not doing very well because of the pandemic, but they have to be very careful in allowing the public to return to the new norm or the new normal. It has to be done in stages. It has to be controlled, because knowing Malaysians, you give them a little bit of flexibility, and that's it. There's going to have very serious consequences. Okay, having said that, let's move on to our next interesting question. What strategies do you think the authorities should be considering in order to address the crisis in the long term?
Okay.
Strategies.
Strategies. Just to also reiterate your interesting point earlier, you mentioned very rightly so that let's look at sustainability theory. We have the three main components for listeners out there: economy, then we have social, and then we have environment. So the pandemic hit. What was affected? Social as well as economy. Was environment impacted? Hardly touched. Yeah, we
No.
had clear blue skies. Yeah, we had clean, pristine beaches. And when we're given an inch, we take a mile. So that's where the problem then reoccurs. Yeah, the environment is then hit once again. So whatever said and done, we still need to go back to what's rooted in, and what should be rooted in all policies moving forward. Yeah, which is based on the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So back to your question, Dr. Ravi, what are the strategies? So the strategy is actually to have an inclusive, concept, to revisit best practices frameworks of crisis management that may have worked on a smaller scale. Yeah, but what we need to do is we need to amplify it to the national level, And not only are we looking into crisis management, but we are looking into the long-term effects of a crisis, the impact of the crisis, and how we are going to come out of the crisis. So it is not just crisis management per se, but it's the entire recovery resilience of the crisis itself. Yeah. So whatever said and done, Dr. Ravi, we have the crisis management frameworks are available. If we look into two very famous ones, is the Deloitte crisis management framework and the INSEAD COVID-19 crisis management blueprint. But most of these blueprints are on the organizational level. So these crisis management frameworks address crises that happen within an organization. So it limits the enabling of the organization to move forward sustainably. Yeah. So this is one of the issues that we have in the current crisis management frameworks that are available today. So what we need to look at are four different areas. Now I'm going to take a little bit of your time here. Yeah. In order to have a resilient industry, we need to look into four main areas, Dr. Ravi. The first one is
Yep.
readiness. Yeah. So readiness, if we look at readiness, think of a document or a plan that should be available to all stakeholders, should be available to all agencies and the government agencies. Yeah. That looks into the degree to which a crisis management plan is developed and the range of responses during the time of crisis. So we're looking at the big picture here, the plan itself, the contingency plan prior to any emergency, when or during the event is being taken place. Yeah. So we're talking about being proactive, not reactive, not when something happens only then we try to think what to do. It has to be all laid out. If this happens, this is what we should do. If that happens, this will be the alternative plan. So if you put into a better context here, in the wake of the disruption, how are you able to reduce the susceptibility of the disruption? That's the question here. Yeah. Or what would be the physical operations that are being threatened? So let me just bring you a little bit to project management. We normally put this in the risk registry, whereby we identify all the different risks, whether or not it is natural or man-made. Yeah, identify the likelihood of it occurring. What will be the severity of the different risks that would occur, and if it would occur, what will be the mitigating actions? What will be the recovery actions? What will be the monitoring mechanisms? Rearranging alternatives, reducing vulnerability, and increasing agility. So there has to be a readiness plan, something which we need to roll out once the crisis occurs. Yeah, and you see, one thing that's very important that we need to also understand is that it doesn't occur immediately. There are control mechanisms, or rather they are indicators to show that it is coming, right? For example, in this case of COVID-19, it started many thousand miles away. We can see that it's probably coming to our shores soon. So that's where the readiness has to be in place. Yeah. So that's one. Second one is the recovery. So effective recovery strategies are categories that look into short-term, medium-term, and long-term recovery. And because of that, we have to also understand that any late response to recovery will cost organizations, will cost industries millions, if not billions of ringgit. So good communication helps reduce the adverse effects of the crisis, and it's also essential contributor to quick recovery. Therefore, organizations are strongly encouraged to establish a particular reserve budget for crisis communication alone. Yeah, in case a crisis would happen. So the communication is very important. The recovery phase embodies, the gap relations, the damage assessment, the impact evaluation, and everything that brings into the context of the recovery per se, yeah, then we need to look at the reform. Reform is something which we often try to uh, delay or not take into serious consideration. But reform is important because continuous improvements and preventive measures based on new learnings. What have we learned from this COVID-19 pandemic? What have we learned from SARS that we did not use in COVID-19? What did we learn from MERS that we are not using today? Yeah, so what will be the learning, the new learnings? We need to contribute to the body of knowledge here. The strong commitment from leadership by the government to address structural and institutional changes. So reform is very important here because once, as I mentioned earlier, we have so many different policies and each individual ministry has its agency and each different agency has its policy. And we're not only looking at the different agencies across, but we're also looking at the different tiers of government, yeah, the federal, state, and the local government. So what we are plagued with, Dr. Ravi, is something called the institutional fragmentation, whereby Malaysia's biggest hurdle to overcome this means that we work in silo rather than across agencies. Yeah, and um, and the last one is resilience. Okay, so resilience look at sustainability in the long term because we have to be ready, not just for a biological warfare like COVID, but any form of crisis, be it terrorism, climate change, geopolitical issues. Yeah, resilience is the ability to withstand and recover, whether from anthropogenic causes or natural disasters. So resilience in the industry resonates the ability to understand and harness market forces, what's happening around us, collaborate with stakeholders to create a strong network, as you mentioned correctly earlier on, strong leadership, agility to change, and adaptive learning. So just to wrap up the question, we're looking into four main areas towards the recovery and the resilience of this industry: readiness, recovery, reform, and resilience. So these are the main four areas that we're looking at, and we hope that the framework, is it is at least going to put us on the right path moving forward. Yeah, Dr. Ravi.
Dr. Mailing, there's something that you mentioned that caught my attention again. The word
Yeah,
leadership. Yes, I find that
leadership.
is a very
Okay.
interesting topic to talk about, and maybe something that is highly sensitive too at this point in time. Do you have any comments for that?
Dr. Ravi, regardless of the
Do you have
leadership
any
of
comments
the
on?
government today, yeah, regardless of the leadership of
Yeah.
the government of the day, the issues remain the same. Yeah, because one of the drawbacks of having very good and multiple policies is that they are severely divergent. Yeah, that is actually the topic of my PhD back in 2014. We have many good policies, but they're all going into different directions. Reason being is because they are institutionalized, they are fragmented, and what we need to do is we need to converge all these policies together. We need to converge the agencies together to have a particular single goal, yeah, um, to overcome and to ensure that the policies are implemented. Also, because the other cumbersome issue that we are facing is not only uh, that the policies are institutionalized, but they're also not implemented. Yeah, I wouldn't say all are not implemented. Of course, don't um, don't quote me on that. But it is there are a lot of policies that are not implemented. They are there. They're just sitting in the shelf somewhere. Yeah, so that we need to implement them as according to what they are created for. Dr. Ravi?
Yes, Dr. Mailing, I definitely agree with you on that. Malaysia is one country where we have all the regulations, we have all the policies in place, all the frameworks in place. We have them all. It's not Malaysia is not a country that is backward. We were definitely not. In terms of policy making, they are really very well equipped when it comes to policies. But I think the crucial point here is implementation. How effectively are these
Correct,
policies
correct,
implemented,
precisely.
executed, and monitored, seen through, so that they are actually working effectively. So I think that is where our weakness lies, not in yeah, yeah, not that we do not have the policy. We do have the policies. It's whether or not they are our biggest right now, shortfall right now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's a very important, crucial point that you made. We have a couple of questions here from our audience. One of the question, if I may read out, it says, Dr. Siow, any ideas how the government or industry has plans to build back build the industry back? Will domestic tourism be better encouraged
Okay.
for internal resiliency? There are actually three
Resiliency.
questions here. And the
Okay.
last question, will the rural tourism, first question, government, any ideas how they back?
The rural tourism play a bigger role. Okay. The first question. Any idea how the
Yeah.
government or industry has planned to build it back? So as I mentioned earlier in our talk, they are introducing travel bubbles, yeah, to ensure that you those traveling within the bubble are COVID free. Of course, it is not an 100% foolproof, but it gives some form of security to both the industry players as well as the tourists. So once we achieve the so-called herd immunity, which some even say that we might not, then our travel bubble then becomes bigger in terms of maybe travel bubble with Singapore, and then we go regional, then we go into other areas that are deemed safe, yeah, in terms of their control over the pandemic. So that's the first answer. The second question: will domestic tourism be better encouraged for internal resiliency? Yes, of course. One of the first step um, within the travel bubble is to reignite the domestic tourism. Yeah, because our fellow Malaysians ourselves, we are very eager to come out from the house and um, visit our tourism attractions. Yeah, and we can't wait to do that. And although the economy will then be circulating within the country, at least it will be moving. The economy moves, so that's what we want. So yes, the domestic tourism would be the first step within the bubble, and that will enable the resiliency within the tourism industry. Yeah, and the third one, will rural tourism play a bigger role? Yes, I think rural tourism is one of the untapped areas, or the underplayed areas within the bigger tourism industry in Malaysia. And if the air travels and all the restrictions within the borders are reopened, then rural tourism then plays a big role, because the city folks will then try to move out from the city area into the rural areas. Yeah, and that's where rural tourism then becomes a economic generator for the kampong folks as well. Dr. Ravi?
Dr. Mailing, you have said it rightly. In Malaysia, for example, one of the hot spots is Sekinchan, Kuala
Mm,
Selangor, Sekinchan. one of the hotspots for rural tourism. So I think definitely rural tourism will have a big role to play. Uh, okay, the next question: how does the tourism departments to sign up for the tourism courses after the pandemic?
How does?
Question, yeah, second
Oh,
question.
okay. Okay, that's a very very good question. In fact, as we speak, I
The
and a
tourism
few other,
department in a
yeah,
public or
I and
private
a,
university.
that's a good question. I'm actually a part of a research team with one of it with Strathclyde University that looks into uh, how we're going to attract students to come and study for tourism when it's become such a dark area now because people don't want to go into tourism because they know that it is in its darkest era. Uh, well, I think one of the highlights is that we need to acknowledge that we are able to experience tourism in multiple ways and forms, and of course, ideally, we want to go to that place in its physical content and context, yeah, to experience the food, to experience the weather, and everything that comes uh, with the trip itself. But at the same time, in one of the areas in resiliency is also to come up with alternative measures, yeah, in order to promote that particular place. So what has been done in the research is that we're looking into uh, e-tourism, or we're looking into how we are able to bring the experience to the user right at the user's doorstep. So if the university, public or private, is able to ensure that its syllabus, encompass this sort of curriculum, then I think it will be much of an attraction because then it gives the I would say the confidence back to the user. And we're not just talking about the students here, we're talking about the parents who are going to pay for the tuition fees, yeah. So the simple bottom line is that the public and private university or college will need to improvise. We need to move forward. We need to be thinking out of the box here. Yeah, because like how e-commerce, we never knew that e-commerce was going to be such a hit in during the time of pandemic. We can even create a game changer within the private and public university. How are we going to do that? The answer, of course, is through virtual experience. Yeah,
Okay, Dr. Mailing,
Dr. Ravi.
another question.
Yeah,
What are the lessons from this pandemic for the tourism industry?
I think the biggest lesson is that we should not depend on a single market. Yeah, we should be able to learn how to absorb the impact, and be agile enough to switch forms and switch mechanisms when the need arises. So, for example, the Malacca Zoo, they don't have visitors because they are not allowed to have visitors. But if you look at their website, they get thousands of visitors every weekend because they have virtual tours. And that's how agile they are. Yeah. And that's how they have tapped into the market. And to tell you honestly, I've never been to the Malacca Zoo until that particular weekend that I saw it appear on my Facebook, and I was enjoying the trip. They showed us the Malayan tiger, they showed us the American raccoons, yeah. So that's the lesson that we need to take from this pandemic, is that we need to be agile, and we can't put all of our eggs into one basket. Otherwise, we will be experiencing the 100 million billion dollar loss, like what we mentioned earlier. Yeah, Dr. Ravi.
Okay, okay, Dr. Mailing, one last question. What are the
Yeah,
relevant measures to revive the tourism industry in Malaysia? The last question.
what the relevant measures? Yeah, so it's what I mentioned in the talk earlier. We're talking about the four main areas. Yeah, so those areas are the recovery plan from the researcher's point of view. Yeah, because it happened in such a huge scale. Yeah, so the recovery plan is still a plan. So Dr. Ravi, the measures to revive the industry
Yep.
needs to come from the top. It needs to come from a workable plan that is being rolled out in stages. What we have now are the recovery plans in stages, and that recovery plan is for the entire nation. But what's a recovery plan for tourism? Should that be different then? So the answer is yes, that should be different because we shouldn't be dependent on a single market. Yeah, like what we mentioned earlier, Dr. Ravi.
Okay, Dr. Mailing, I think the take home for today is the 4 R's that you mentioned. All right. The first one is readiness, second, recovery, third, reform, and the last one, resilience. These are the 4 R's,
Resilience.
and that's going to be the take home for us today. I think if we work on these 4 R's, I think we will be on the right track, on the track back to recovery. All right, with that, it's already time. Up, we had 1 hour for the session. Thank you very much, Dr. Siow May Ling, for your invaluable time, for your precious thoughts and insights. That has been very, very useful. I think some of the audience have benefited immensely from your sharing today. We have learned a lot, and we will probably have another session which is going to be called Cradle to Cradle. I like that word that you
Yeah.
used, Cradle to Cradle. I think I found that very interesting, and another listener also found that to be very interesting. But unfortunately, time does not permit. So we will have another session another day on the topic called Cradle to Cradle. All right. Thank you once
Okay.
again, Dr.
Okay.
Xiao Mei Ling.
Thank you, Dr.
All
Ravi.
right,
Always a pleasure. Thank you
for
for
your
having me.
invaluable time.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you to you, and thank
and
you
I'd like to
to
thank our audience.
yeah.
Thanks a lot to the audience, and lastly, thanks to Asia Pacific University for giving this opportunity. All right, have a great evening and have a great weekend. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.